standard practice. Localizing women, peace, and security in Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Lebanon, and Nigeria. My name is Katrina Leclerc. I'm the program director at the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we here in the Permanent Mission of Canada to the United Nations and the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders office nearby are on Munsi Lenape people's lands. And so we'd like to acknowledge and thank them for welcoming us and allowing us to live and work on their unceded lands. I'd like to also thank our co-hosts, of course, the team at the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, the Permanent Missions of Canada and of Colombia to the United Nations, and our colleagues at UN Women who have been with us along this journey of localizing women, peace, and security. Today we have interpretation in several languages. We have American Sign Language interpretation, Arabic, English, French, and Spanish. You'll be able to take advantage of this accessibility feature by using the interpretation button on your Zoom screen, which can either be found at the bottom right of your screen if you're on a computer, or in your three little dots on your mobile devices. So we really encourage you to be able to tune in the language of your choice. We will also be posting biographies of our different speakers in the chat box, because we want to give as much time to the conversation as possible. So we invite you to refer to the chat to learn more about our outstanding speakers. We invite you also to introduce yourself in the chat. We want to know who you are and where you are around the world to be able to bring together this global community. So please do introduce yourselves. We will also be saving the chat after the event. We encourage you to use the question and answer box as well throughout the event, as there will be an opportunity to engage with the speakers, and we will be responding to some of the questions which will be coming out throughout the event. Lastly, before I turn it over to others, we encourage you to use social media to amplify the voices of women peacebuilders, as is our motto at GNWP, by using the hashtag Localizing1325. And so you can engage in this conversation further on Twitter and other social media platforms using this hashtag. Today, we are gathered to enable local women peacebuilders from all four of these wonderful countries, Colombia, DRC, Lebanon, and Nigeria, to present their experiences in implementing the Women, Peace, and Security resolutions, including the use of Gender-Based Analysis Plus, a tool developed by the Government of Canada, which we have been applying and implementing along with the Women, Peace, and Security resolutions. We also want to discuss how localization itself as a strategy lends itself to timely, practical, and effective response to conflict and crises, such as COVID-19, and why it should be a standard practice, as we are all sold in the effectiveness of the implementation. And of course, we want to generate support for the work and the incredible work of the local women peacebuilders who have been localizing women, peace, and security in all of the corners of the world, and be able to bring along policymakers, donors, civil society leaders in this journey together. Before I introduce our opening remarks speakers, I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the Honorable Senator Mary Lou and former Minister Stephen Gauja from Sierra Leone, who are joining us as well here in person, and who we will have the honor of hearing from later today. And now, without further ado, one of our wonderful co-hosts and friends, I'd like to turn it over to Lynn Wallace, the First Secretary of the Permanent Mission of Canada to the UN, for a few opening remarks. Over to you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Canada is pleased to co-sponsor this event organized by the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders alongside the Permanent Mission of Colombia and UN Women. On behalf of Canada's permanent mission to the United Nations, it is an honor to host such a remarkable group of leaders here in this room and online. Peace processes, as we know, are more durable when women participate. And yet women are increasingly targeted by threats and violence, are sidelined in decision-making and peace talks, and lack funding for their work. And as underscored during the annual UN Security Council debate on women, peace, and security last week, We are seeing a reversal in generational gains and women's and girls' rights in many parts of the world. We owe the women and girls who take great risks to build peace and security every day to redouble our efforts with urgency to implement the Women, Peace and Security agenda and to make transformational change. And we will not be able to make progress unless we support and listen to local women peace builders. For our part, Canada recognizes the importance of supporting the efforts of local women peace builders, and we were very pleased to support the Global Network of Women Peace Builders to expand its localization of its WPS program. And we very much look forward to learning from all of you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you so much to the Government of Canada for the ongoing support over the years. And of course, in our 4 wonderful countries featured here today. Now I'd like to pass it over to our colleague from the Permanent Mission of Colombia to the United Nations, Natalia Sanchez. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Over to you.
Oh, thank you. And I'm going to speak in English mostly for the people at the table because I know that online you have interpretation. And I'm not going to take long, mostly because I see that Sandra is across me on the table, and I'm pretty sure that she will be able to tell you more about what is being done in Colombia. From the government perspective, we have been advancing recently in developing the National Action Plan for the 1325 resolution. Recently we have an event in which the guidance, the roadmap was presented, and that roadmap is going to include a following of pillars. One of them is an interinstitutional group from entities of the states, for Congress and the judicial branch, in order to have a whole of government approach. We are also going to have a gender table for international cooperation with UN entities and states. And I just realized that I'm speaking too fast for the interpreters. And apologies. And then we are also going to have regional dialogues, 5 regional dialogues, and 1 national dialogue with civil society. And our main goal is to have a text that is concerted, to have, as I said, a whole government approach, but also a whole society approach. And that is what is guiding us. And I'm really glad to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for your remarks and sharing with us the new advances happening in Colombia. We're very excited about this national action plan. And I know Sandra will speak a lot about this and the role civil society has also played in which now is the development process of the national action plan in Colombia. We're very excited. And now, without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor over to our colleague from UN Women, Sarah Douglas. Thank you for joining us online. Over to you.
Thank you, colleagues. So great to be with you today, and apologies for dialing in online, but I have a sick toddler, as you might have seen running behind me in the screen here. It's really wonderful to get the chance to exchange and be with all of you today, not just those of you in New York, but also around the world. Today, over 2 years after the onset of COVID, we are still seeing really dramatic declines in peace and security, and also gender equality around the world. Women's peace building efforts actually have been underfunded and undermined at the very time when I think they're needed the most. Despite this, and often at great personal risk, women peace builders are continuing to mobilize constituencies for peace, hold decision makers accountable, mediate conflict, and successfully stand up for human rights. In 2021, in our common agenda, the UN Secretary General proposed a new agenda for peace with more investment in prevention and peace building, including to respond to the long-term impacts of the pandemic and also compounding shocks from climate change, which continue to have a disproportionate impact on women and girls. At UN Women, we're trying to leverage our capacity to bolster the work of our partners, for example, through our partnership with the Peacebuilding Support Office, but we want to do more, especially with partnerships with local women peacebuilders and young women. For example, last year in Lebanon, we launched an award-winning campaign called #TheMissingPeace. This aimed to raise awareness about the importance of including women in national dialogues and peace-building negotiations. Over the past 40 years, no women have taken part in peace talks in Lebanon. On the 15th of November last year, in partnership with Twitter, which we've all been hearing in the news today, UN Women removed 50% of the letters from the news that denounce the inclusion of women. In just one day, we garnered over 695 million impressions and reached 93.1 million followers across 61 countries. And this actually trended organically for over 3 days. Last year, we also produced a study on the impact of COVID-19 on young women peacebuilders, which highlighted how the pandemic has led donors to divert funding and financing away from long-term peacebuilding initiatives. Young women peacebuilders who already operate on extremely limited budgets expressed frustration and raised how difficult it is to continue their long-term conflict resolution work. Still, we know that localization is needed in order to progress both WPS and YPS and to have a chance at lasting and positive global peace. The time has come now that we have 22 years since the passing of 1325 to finally translate WPS commitments into action with specific measures to ensure meaningful participation and adequate financing for youth and youth-led organizations. From UN Women's side, here's our commitment. Number one, to continue to amplify young voices in international forums like the Security Council and the Peacebuilding Commission, and try to ensure diversity of age, gender, background, and experience. Number two, to strengthen our programmatic response on gender responsive and youth inclusive peacebuilding, to increase the number of peacebuilding projects that focus on the intersection between women and youth, and strengthen partnerships with young women-led organizations for project design and implementation. And number three, increase accessible financing opportunities for youth and women's organizations. For example, the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund has been a source of flexible funding and quality funding for youth-led organizations, reaching more than 27 of them over the past few years. And we actually aim to double the number of youth-led recipients in 2022. In today's event, we have the unique opportunity to hear from local women peacebuilders from Colombia, DRC, Lebanon, and Nigeria. To the women peacebuilders around the world, we thank you for your hard work. You are driving the change, and please continue to be confident and bold in your demands. To my fellow UN counterparts, to governments, to leaders, women peacebuilders have solutions for peace. And it's finally time to listen, support, and nurture their work. And I'd like to thank and recognize GNWP for their continued advocacy and leadership on this, as well as our partners in today's event, Colombia and Canada. Thank you for your leadership and partnership. Over.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for UN Women's partnership in the localization of women, peace, and security for many, many years. And I'd like to invite all of us in the room to lift up our localization toolkits, which we brought with us. GNWP developed this localization toolkit, and it's translated in French, Arabic, and Spanish. It was developed back a few years ago in 2018, I believe, and in collaboration with UN Women. So we're very grateful for UN Women's continued support and to be able to build off of what we've learned and what we've unlearned through the localization process. Now, I'd like to turn our attention to our wonderful Chief Executive Officer, Mavic Cabrera-Baeza, who will share with us some remarks and also an overview of the localization strategy, as Mavic is our pioneer localization expert and developer. Over to you, Mavic.
Thank you. A wonderful morning to you, Katrina, and everyone in the room and online. And yeah, special thanks to our co-organizers, the Permanent Mission of Canada to the UN here in New York, the Permanent Mission of Colombia, and UN Women. And thank you, Lynn, for kindly hosting us again. This is a special moment because it's the first time that we're returning to holding an event in the mission after more than 2.5 years. The Global Network of Women Peacebuilders pioneered the localization of the Women, Peace and Security Resolutions as an implementation strategy in 2011. And I should also mention that Canada was one of our first supporters of the localization. And that was even before we were able to prove, as we do now, that localization makes a difference in implementation. It is a bottom-up approach to policy making and policy implementation that aligns local, national, regional, and global policies and community-driven strategies to ensure local ownership and participation, which are key ingredients in effective implementation. It convenes governors, mayors, councilors, indigenous leaders, paramount chiefs, school teachers, of course, women and youth organizations, and also including local police and military officers to integrate women, peace, and security commitments in their work. That is one thing we underline, that we implement localization not to add more bureaucratic work, bureaucracy in their work, but to strengthen their operations. In working with local leaders, we also solicit support from the national government. And I'm looking at the former Minister of Gender in Sierra Leone, with whom we worked back then, because the success in local implementation has to be elevated to the national level, because that's the essence of a bottom-up approach. From local communities, you raise that to influence policies at the national, regional, and global levels. Otherwise, it would remain as isolated success stories in local communities, and instead of bottom-up, it will just be bottom-bottom. Now implemented in 18 countries and over 200 municipalities, districts, states, the localization strategy has been cited multiple times in the report of the Secretary General on Women, Peace and Security to the Security Council, highlighting that it is an implementation strategy that guarantees accountability and ensures sustainability, because there's a commitment from the local councils, the city councils, municipal councils, including integrating it in their own budget, which we hardly see in national governments. The local and national impact and the global recognition of these strategies stress the need to transform localization from a best practice to a standard practice. The COVID-19 pandemic required the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, like anyone else, to pivot our program implementation to address the emergent needs on the ground. Across all of the countries we work in, we have documented that localization lent itself to quick and effective response to the pandemic. Why? Because the localization steering committees that we have formed through our localization program have transformed themselves into the first responders who are working with frontliners. And Sarah's emphasis on local women and young women peacebuilders were exactly the same groups that who have been working with us on localization, that immediately in Colombia, for example, in Cauca and Tolima, worked with indigenous guards to distribute face masks, to distribute hygiene products, including reproductive healthcare products such as pregnancy test kits and condom, because there was such shortage of all of those products at the height of the pandemic. So and then in DRC, Lebanon and Nigeria, our wonderful partners would also share similar experiences, I'm sure. So this is yet another reason why localization should be a standard practice in implementation. And it also highlights another point, the nexus between conflicts and humanitarian emergencies. That in most government responses, there is a tendency to choose one over the other. Of course, we understand the immediate needs, but we are also hoping that deprioritizing peace building efforts would also have equally devastating impact. And one of the hashtags that we have been using at the height of the pandemic is that peace cannot wait and peace cannot be a victim of the pandemic. Another critical contribution of localization is the gender analysis of conflicts and crises. All of our localization workshops begin with a session on collective and participatory analysis of the conflict, the specific impacts on women and girls, and the added impact of their identity factors. If they are coming from indigenous groups, if they are coming from communities from African descent, or they are already in abject poverty, how does that add to their identity as women, men, girls, and boys? And how do existing government policies recognize or do not recognize those identity factors and their expected gender roles? In implementing localization in Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Lebanon, and Nigeria, GNWP and our members and partners use the gender-based analysis plus, which they will be speaking about during the rest of the panel. And as Katrina already mentioned, this methodology was created by the Status of Women Canada, and it allows us to use this methodology in a very practical manner because of its adaptability and flexibility. We're very excited about this panel, again, because this is the first time that we're meeting in person. We still have most of our colleagues online, but hopefully soon we'll be able to manage this better. And we are privileged to have Sandra and Justine with us, and Shireen and Patience online. And at GNWP, our mission is to amplify local women's voices and ensure that they influence global policy spaces. I also want to mention that in facilitating spaces for them to speak in their own authentic voices, we also make use of global infrastructure that the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders is proud to have contributed or have led the advocacy in their establishment. And I refer to the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund that the Canadian government also support, and some of our members online are grantees of WPHF. And the other global infrastructure is the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action. And I acknowledge UN Women incredible support to us in our advocacy for this global infrastructures, and specifically Sarah and our Sarah Douglas and our colleague Tatiana Jitineva, with whom we worked for many years before this infrastructure were established. I want to conclude by sharing how the importance of localization was underscored in the 2015 global study on the implementation of Resolution 1325. It states, post-conflict peace building must respect the specificities of the local context. Localization should be a major policy directive of international actors going to the field. Localization approaches and inclusive and participatory processes are crucial to the success of national and international peace efforts. Good and peaceful morning to all of us.
Thank you so much, Mavik. Maybe we can clap. I think it's it's merited. Thank you so much, Mavik, for giving us this overview of the localization strategy and also reminding us of the importance both at the local and at the global level for all of us. Now, we promised you a conversation with women peace builders, our beloved partners from across the world, these 4 major countries which we're highlighting today, and how we were going to do this. We're going to try and make this a little bit less formal as other panels do. We're doing this in a 2-part talk show. Bear with us. We will have the first talk show led by my colleague Cecilia Lazara, our focal point for Latin America, which will be interviewing our colleague Sandra Cardoso from Red Nacional de Mujeres from Colombia, and as well Shirin Jordi, who is joining us online from the Permanent Peace Movement in Lebanon. So over to you, Cecilia, for this first talk show interview.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Katrina, for this introduction. I'm very excited to host this first talk show. We have 2 stellar women peace builders, Sandra here with me, and Shrin virtually. We're very much looking forward to listening and learning more about the particularities of each context and how strong civil societies Colombia and Lebanon serve as catalysts to promote localization from the ground up. So Sandra and Shrin, how is it going to work? I will ask you 4 questions. I will proceed with the first question and I will allow you both time to answer. You will have approximately 2 minutes per question, and then we will move on to the next one. Just as a note to the virtual participants, if you have any questions for Shrin or Sandra, please post them in the chat box because we will address them in the Q&A section. So let's get started. The first question I would like to ask is, how have you used gender-based analysis plus, this intersectional approach which we promote in implementing the women, peace and security agenda locally? Maybe we can start with Shrin first.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I want to thank GNWP for organizing this session and the Permanent Mission of Colombia, Canada, and UN Women also for co-hosting. Let me say that as part of our work in Lebanon, gender-based analysis plus, it was a Permanent Peace Movement and the National Commission for Lebanese Women who did this. But as for us, at the Permanent Peace Movement, we use the GBA plus methodology systematically in all our work. First, we use the GBA plus methodology in the design of our workshops to ensure that we are being inclusive of all stakeholders at the national and local levels. This includes youth, refugees, LGBTQ, and communities from all marginalized groups in Lebanon. We also use the GBA plus methodology during our workshops to foster inclusive discussions to allow the workshop participants to critically reflect on their identities and how different women and different groups experience policies and initiatives. By using the GBA Plus methodology, we ensure that the initiatives and programs we develop are addressing the needs of the most vulnerable populations, and most importantly, we ensure that their voices are being heard in the spaces that we create. Just to give one example, we make sure that we have a contact person in the different localities, and that different person, it's inclusive of all the stakeholders in an inclusive way. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Rin, for that remarks and for telling us how GBA Plus in Lebanon, through the process of localization, helps to capture all this diversity. So thank you for these clear examples. So Sandra, back to you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to start that the National Network of Women has promoted the process of localization for more than 20 years. So this is not a new process. That's very important to say. And with the participation with different actors. For example, local authorities, in the case of Colombia, in Cauca, including indigenous authorities, that's important for us, civil society in all its diversity. The intersectional approach, we consider that is not an strategy, is necessary because respond to local realities. That's why localizing the women, peace, and security agenda is very important, taking into account ethnicity, age, sexual diversities, morality with campesinas, for example. And in the case of the localization process in Cauca, a region mostly with indigenous and Afro-Colombian population, ethnicity, age, rurality are important factors for the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I really liked how you mentioned that GBA Plus is not a strategy, but rather a necessity. So I think we should keep ourselves with that quote. So thank you. And yes, in fact, all these intersecting factors need to be taken into account in local implementation, so we can effectively address the root causes of violence and build more inclusive community. So thank you. So the next question in our talk show. I'm trying to be this time, Sandra, I will start with you.
Okay.
The next question is, how have you contextualized the localization strategy to suit the local needs? And I think, and I don't want to spoil you the answer, but I think we have a video or something that is going to complement your speaking points. Yeah.
In the localization process carried out in the region of Cauca, a region affected by the armed conflict and characterized by the presence of indigenous Afro-Colombian communities, as I mentioned before. The implementation of the agenda of women, peace and security has been a process in which localization methodologies has been adapted. As Mavic mentioned, there is a methodology, but we adapted to a local context, with a local indigenous context. The example that we have, we highlight most is the game called Women Advance Toward Peace, that we implement in all our trainings. People is so excited, and it's the best example where civil society and the same table and the local authorities, they are playing because they learn about this agenda. So it's for us, we are so proud of this game, and we want to share with you because maybe it's gonna be a good tool for other contexts. This resource is part of the materials that make up the methodology in the localization of the resolution 1325. This is the example in Totoro. There is a indigenous municipality, and This is a person of the local, it's a local authority. So they were so happy. And to see at the same table just playing, it's good to see. In addition, we have a website. It's mujerespazyiseguridad.co. We have information about the resolution, videos, podcasts, monitoring reports of the resolution, and information about the National Prize of Journalism, Women, Peace and Security.
Thank you, Sandra, for that. I must say I'm a big fan of this board game. It's an incredible creative initiative designed by local women to address your specific needs. And as you mentioned, it fosters social cohesion between all different actors, because you're literally bringing all actors, civil society, authorities to the same table. So thank you for that, Sandra. And Shireen, let's go with you.
Wow, let me tell Sandra, I'm the second fan, and I think everybody in the room is a fan of this. And definitely we want to utilize this game into our work as well. I think this is very interesting. Thank you for sharing. As for Lebanon and the contextualization, now thinking of it does not only apply to Lebanon, but I think to different areas in conflict, but especially within the Lebanese case, in the absence of strong national institutions and a strong decentralized structure, and in the spirit of the Ta'if Agreement, which put an end to the war 30 years ago, and called for decentralization as one of the pillars for sustaining peace in Lebanon within the Lebanese context. Unfortunately, this did not achieve, was not achieved, but in our work, PPM and GNWP have used localization as a strategy to maintain the spirit of 1325 and the National Action Plan, and to continue to its implementation at the local levels. The collapse of national institutions, most notably the financial and economic institutions, has strongly affected local municipalities and their ability to develop or implement local plans. Through localization, we're coming together to discuss alternative strategies, to pool our efforts and build on each other to advance our collective actions to implement 1325 and the WPS resolutions. Through the localization workshops, we have been able to identify and build on existing local peace-building efforts in a very intersectional way by looking at actions around health, security, economic security, peace and security. For me, the way we're doing that is just giving women who, once we start to talk to them and tell them like you're doing the peace and security work, and they say, no, it's not that we're doing peace and security. After we do our sessions and after we tell them about all these localizing tips, then at the end of the discussion, they're so proud of themselves and they start to recognize their work as peace and security, because all of the work that they do falls within the human security, the way that we are living now in Lebanon in terms of food, economic, health, name it. So women are doing an excellent work, and it's through the localization work that we're doing, we're able to bring it up front.
Thank you, Shireen, for that lovely answer. I cannot agree more. Women already know how peace and security looks like on the ground. But unfortunately, it's not often recognized in the policy sphere. So it's important that through this localization process, we highlight their leadership and their peace-building agency. Thank you for doing that. Well, so the third question in this talk show will be, what has the response been at the local level to the localization of women, peace and security? And how do local authorities and leaders develop ownership of the women, peace and security agenda? So I think we started with Sandra, the last question. So let's go with Shireen for this one again. Thank you.
Yeah, That's very important question, and thank you for raising that. In Lebanon, the role of local communities is very important, and it's getting more important than ever before. With the collapse of the national institutions, the local communities are rising to the occasion to come together and take ownership of the women, peace, and security agenda, despite the many challenges the local authorities and municipalities face. Throughout the localization process, the response of local authorities has been very positive. One key success has been increasing the relevance of the WPS agenda to the local authorities, and related to that, elevating the role and status of women at the local level. Throughout this process, women's voices, women's agencies, and women's leadership is uplifted and respected. Just to give you one example, one of the women in a local municipality, in our discussion, she was unable to recognize what are the local development plans or the process of financing a local development plans. But once we started to have this integrated approach, once we started to have further discussion and focus groups and to map these peace building initiatives, it turned out that the work that women do is very much related to the local needs and local priorities. And it's not because there are no local development plans on the region itself, but it's them, it's a bottom-up approach. And it was through localization that we were able to know bit by bit how women at the grassroots level are able to come and to build what is needed. Definitely they don't put it within local plans, but we are telling them that you are doing local plans.
That's very much right. And thank you also for pointing out the challenges as well as how localization can create and enable spaces to work together with authorities and civil society leaders to translate these local needs and bring it to perhaps national frameworks. Thank you. Sandra, back to you.
Thanks. I want to start to tell you about the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. This agenda has become a reality for us due to the advocacy of made by the women's movement in Colombia, both in Cauca, a regional context, but at the national level in the advocacy process to have a national action plan. It's important to clarify that the localization process has taken for more than 20 years, as I mentioned before, in a context where we don't have a national action plan. And in which it's very important the strong role of the civil society to insist on the appropriation of this agenda. We are convinced that the sustainable location of this agenda requires technical, human, and financial resources that must be allocated by the authorities and the participation of women. Is necessary for the appropriation of this agenda. A good example in Colombia is the Colombian signing of a peace agreement in 2016 on the inclusion of the gender approach, sexual diversity, and ethnic diversity. The women's movement advocate at various points. The first one, the participation of women at the peace table, the subcommission of gender, to ensure that the entire peace agreement has a gender approach, achieve the inclusion of an ethnic approach, and achieve the inclusion of the LGBTI population. In the negotiation now with the ELN, the protocol of the negotiation has not been defined. There are many concerns about the issue of this dialogue with other illegal groups. That it's something that we don't know, and it's not clear what proposal is being approved in Congress now with all the things about conciliation. More information will be available in a few weeks. That's the context now. Maybe Laura can talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I agree that it's very important to highlight the uniqueness of the case in Colombia, because despite of not having an national action plan yet, you're still implementing localization of the women visa security, as you said, for over more than 2 decades. I mean, this is an excellent opportunity to show how the strategies itself are placed from the bottom up. And how localization can also serve is an advocacy to ensure that women are included at all levels of decision making. So last question, and we will begin this show. My last question is, what has this process taught you about gender-sensitive crisis response, and what advice would you give to others looking to initiate the process? I would kindly ask you, Shireen and Sandra, if you can really summarize this answer in 1 sentence, perhaps, because I'm conscious of the time. So Shireen, let's go with you first.
Yeah, in 1 sentence, then the lives of women are not a project. This is women dealing with women in conflict area. And I think this is the most important thing to know.
Thank you, Shireen, for that. Yeah, and unfortunately, I couldn't agree more. Sandra, let's go with you.
And I agree with Shireen, but I want to highlight the important role of the civil society and the women's movement to incite the appropriation of this agenda.
Well, thank you so much to our 2 wonderful speakers, Shireen and Sandra.
Thank you so much for amazing session.
Yeah, we really learned from all your insightful comments. And well, over to you, Katrina, to kick off the next panel.
Thank you. And I'm a big believer in celebration. So let's clap a round of applause. Our first topic. Gracias and shukran to all 3 of you. Now, I am pleased to be able to host this second talk show to focus on our strides, but also acknowledging the pushbacks and what we've learned from the pushbacks over the last decade of the localization process that's been happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in Nigeria. And we have our colleague Justine Masika, who is with us from la Synergie des Femmes pour les Victimes de Violences Sexuelles au Nord Kivu en RDC. And our colleague Patience Ikpe, who is online. I don't know if we can see you, Patience. Oh, here you are. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us from WPS, Nigeria, the West Africa's network for women Peacebuilders. And we're so excited also. Fun fact, I love fun facts. We're so excited to have Patience here, who was the first inaugural Cora Weiss Fellow for Peacebuilding Fellow at the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, and now heads the programs at WPS Nigeria. So funny, small family, big hearts at GNWP. Exactly. My first question, we're so happy to have you in this capacity, Patience. My first question, I will go over to you, Patience, first. Ensuite, ce sera à vous, Maman Justine. What successes have you seen in implementing the localization strategy in Nigeria? Over to you first.
Thank you, Katrina. Once again, I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And I want to say a very big thank you to the Global Women Peacebuilders, GNWP, and the permanent mission of Canada to the UN and of Colombia, and as well as UN Women who have all co-hosted this event. I am honored today to present some of the results that we've had as a result of implementing the project, amplifying women's voices, strengthening local and national partnerships, localization of the Women, Peace and Security Resolution in Nigeria. For us in WPS Nigeria, having carried out this project in 2 states in the Northeast, Bauchi and Gombe states, we've been able to apply innovative methods of building relationships and synergizing with gatekeepers and ensuring that various stakeholders, such as policymakers, security institutions, traditional opinion leaders, religious leaders, and also non-state actors are able to come together during the localization workshop and build synergy for women's participation in issues of peace and security. For us, the key outcome of our localization workshop has been the drafting of 4 local action plans on UNSCR 1325 for Katagum and Toro local government areas in Bauchi State, and Kwami and Balanga in Gombe State. These draft local action plans were developed with accompanying budgets and commitments gotten from traditional council and local government authorities to involve women in peace building processes. And they've been able to provide also for the inclusion of women in what we have as a local peace building committee, commonly referred to as Zauren Suru. So all the local women that we trained from the localization program we've had are part of this local peace building committee. Also, the members of localization steering committee in Balanga local government area of Gombe State have been able to wade into conflicts between Wajab and Lugunda ethnic groups in the local government area. And they successfully initiated 3 peace dialogues with youth groups, with women groups, and with men groups. And also, they've been able to carry out, have young persons carry out an inter-ethnic peace football match, which has provided a platform for them to speak to people in these 2 communities on the need for peaceful coexistence. Furthermore, as part of a localization project that we've had here in Nigeria, Localization Steering Committee in Bauchi State have been able to train women group leaders on changing the narrative, having peace narratives in their communities, bearing in mind the ongoing insurgency in the Northeast. This has helped to strengthen participation of women in changing existing narrative on violence and counter violent ethnic propagandas within the local communities. With regard to the media, we've also had trainings for media as part of this project on understanding the women, peace and security agenda. And as I speak to you, we have a platform tagged Media for Peace with over 100 media practitioners presently in Nigeria who are projecting the views, concerns of women on issues that pertain to peace building, security, development, and nation building. Also, we've been able to train young persons, young women and young men in skills, peace building, leadership and advocacy skills. And these young persons also are also projecting their voices through a radio program we have in 6 states across Nigeria titled Women Voices for Peace. So in all, this strategy is effectively helping to garner the support of various stakeholders to ensure that the concerns, the views, and perspective of women are brought to the forefront in terms of peace and security. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patience. And in 10 years of implementing the Women, Peace and Security resolutions through the localization strategy, there's no doubt that there's a lot to speak to. So thank you for summarizing that with us. What I'd like to maybe highlight is these 4 local action plans in Gombe and Bauchi districts, huge achievements with the accompanied budgets, commitments that are smart, specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, trackable. The local peace building committees and local steering committees on 1325 are also extremely active, as you've highlighted. Of course, the problem or responses more so of young people to the pressing issues and the conflicts in the region is so important. I want to also highlight, and I'm sure you can speak more about this, Patience, in some of your responses, but when we started working together on the Young Women Plus Leaders for Peace project back in the day, and we launched the chapter in Nigeria together, there were too many young people who wanted to join. We had to make and adapt the methodology because there were hundreds of young people who signed up to be part of the initial inception workshop, and we had money for 30 people. So we've had to adapt and respond to the overt need and excitement of young people, which for us demonstrated also their own commitments to peace and peace building. And of course, the media is so important, as you've highlighted, as a key role. They have a key role in awareness raising at the community level, and this is part of our full cycle of implementation on women, peace and security. So thank you so much for highlighting this, Patience. Justine, à vous pour la question. I'm repeating the question to Justine. Quels sont des succès que vous avez eus dans la mise en œuvre de la stratégie de la localisation au Nord Kivu en RDC? Donc, il va falloir enlever les écouteurs pour pouvoir parler.
Merci beaucoup, Catherine. Et je remercie DMWP, la mission canadienne, la mission colombienne, de nous donner cette opportunité pour que nous puissions parler de nos succès de la mise en œuvre de la 1325. La République démocratique du Congo a une stratégie nationale. La première stratégie nationale a été adoptée en 2010 avec 10 points, avec 10 thématiques. Et nous avons vulgarisé cette première stratégie de mise en œuvre de la résolution 1325. Et GNWP, avec CAFCO, ont développé un guide pour l'intégration de la résolution 1325 dans les plans locaux de développement. Heureusement pour nous, la province du Nord Kivu a des plans locaux de développement dans chaque entité territoriale décentralisée. Donc, notre travail était de leur montrer que vous avez oublié une actrice importante qui est la femme. Et donc, ça nous a permis d'intégrer la 1325 dans les plans locaux de développement. Avec les plaidoyers que nous avons menés, nous sommes arrivés à ce que nous puissions avoir 50% hommes, 50% femmes dans les comités, puisque chaque entité territoriale décentralisée a un comité. Mais nous nous sommes dit, c'est très bien d'avoir les femmes dans les comités, mais nous voulons que les femmes prennent des places de prise de décision. Et c'est le travail que nous menons jusqu'à aujourd'hui, puisque ce n'est pas facile que les hommes cèdent les places de prise de décision aux femmes. Et en 2020, nous avons donc la RDC a maintenant le deuxième plan, la deuxième stratégie pour la 1325. Et cette fois-ci, c'est avec 4 thématiques, les thématiques de l'agenda femmes, paix et sécurité. Et nous travaillons pour vulgariser cette deuxième stratégie. Malheureusement, nous connaissons beaucoup de problèmes. Malgré les succès que nous avons, puisque nous avons connu des succès pour l'intégration, mais aujourd'hui, avec la deuxième stratégie, nous avons des problèmes faute de financement. Comme vous le savez, en 2020, il y avait la pandémie de COVID-19, donc c'était difficile qu'on puisse travailler. 2021, et là, on commençait à se relever, ça n'a pas été facile. Et aujourd'hui, en 2022, nous n'avons pas, donc on n'avait pas aligné un budget spécial pour la mise en œuvre de la stratégie en RDC, mais avec les plaidoyers que nous menons, croyons que la dernière année, 2023, on aura quand même des organisations qui vont soutenir le plan national de la RDC. Ce qui est vrai est que nous avons travaillé pour que nous puissions avoir un comité 1325 au niveau provincial, mais aussi la synergie a beaucoup travaillé pour les comités territoriaux au niveau des entités, au niveau de l'entité de Lubero et de Massissi. On continue, donc là je parle des succès, parce que là on travaille. Et sur les succès, il y a aussi le travail que font les jeunes femmes leaders pour la paix. Et elles ont beaucoup travaillé sur la vulgarisation de la 1325. Elles organisent des réunions avec les clubs contre les violences basées sur les genres dans des universités, 5 universités sur place. Il y a aussi des suivis des jeunes entrepreneurs, des entrepreneurs, puisque là, on travaille beaucoup sur l'entrepreneuriat féminin. Je crois que je peux m'arrêter là.
C'est parfait et ça nous ouvre aussi la porte pour la prochaine question. Donc, je vais faire un petit résumé pour nos collègues dans la salle qui n'ont pas la chance d'entendre votre propos en anglais. So, Justine, thank you so much for sharing with us a little bit of the history behind the National Action Plans, the first and the second iteration of the National Action Plan in the DRC. The localization guidelines, which were developed in conjunction with the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and CAFCO, Le Cadre Permanent pour la Femme Congolaise, which is another partner of GNWP based in Kinshasa. The localization guidelines, which were developed originally in 2015, served as a tool, Justine says, to be able to integrate the localization process across the different provinces, now 23 provinces in DRC. This was done because of the decentralization system, or the actual decentralization system that is currently in the DRC. The localization process output was integration of gender provisions in local development plans, as you're saying, Justine. And this has been very successful. It also brought on a 50-50 approach for gender equality among the decentralization committees at the local level, and ensured the participation of women in those spaces. And through the various advocacy convenings and advocacy campaigns that SFVS and other partners have led, they were able to ensure that the actual positions and participation in these local committees was to ensure that women had decision-making power in those spaces as well. In the second National Action Plan, as you said, Justine, it is a little bit more difficult. This new action plan was adopted at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. It saw the heights of the pandemic, which limited, of course, access to resources and availability of individuals because of the health crisis. And so this 2022 year has kept women hopeful for the continued implementation and the renewed implementation, despite the lack of a dedicated budget in this new National Action Plan. And SFVS was able to advocate to have and create a provincial 1325 committee, which SFVS now co-chairs and has a significant role in developing also territorial committees and the integration of gender in the local development plan, especially in the areas of Lubero and Masisi. And of course, Justine, we cannot speak about the work in Arkivu without speaking of the Young Women Leaders for Peace, the work of the extraordinary young women who are working with us since 2015. They have now partnered with universities, and specifically in university clubs, working on gender-based violence and preventing gender-based violence, and they work on economic empowerment. And I want to add, perhaps, Justine, to the modest showcasing that you've done of the Young Women Leaders. They are among our most active chapters, one of the eldest as well, and have trained over 4,000 young women across the province of North Kivu and DRC on different areas of the women, peace and security and youth peace and security agendas. So this is something we're very proud of, and seeing that leadership that they've done over the years. Now, the next question, perhaps Patience and Justine, la prochaine question. Because we see all of this success, we can record all of this success. We see also, and we realize, of course, that it has not always been easy. There has been some pushback. There have been difficulties that we encountered. This is the nature of working with people, working in these contexts. So what difficulties or pushbacks have arisen in your contexts? How have you adapted, particularly to some of these difficulties or pushbacks that you have experienced? So perhaps over to you, Patience, et ensuite à vous, Justine. So Patience, over to you.
Okay, very much. For us, in implementing this project, the key difficulty that we have witnessed has been resentment from local actors, particularly traditional leaders, who do not really have understanding on the need to include women, issues of peace building and making processes at the community level. According to them, due to cultural and religious norms and beliefs, women have no place on peace and security tables. So for us in WANEP, we do what we call continuous advocacy. We're able to visit traditional leaders and other stakeholders to enable them understand what 1325 is all about. We even go with pictorial guides and handbooks in local languages for them to be able to understand what the resolution principles are. And at present, we have a group of traditional rulers in Balanga local government area where the Localization Steering Committee is most active, championing women inclusion in traditional council and girl-child education. Also, another key difficulty, pushback that we've experienced has been lack of financial support for peace building initiatives in local communities by the women. So at the end, in some Toro local government area, to be precise, the women have really been asking for seed grants for them to carry out local peace building initiatives in their localities after localization workshop. So this has been a challenge for us. But for us in OneF, we've been able to send some amount of money just to help them sensitize people in their local communities to ensure that the Localization Steering Committee in the local government area is actually carrying out activities in that locality. So these has been the two key difficulties that we have encountered in implementing localization projects.
Thank you so much, Patience. And I think it also speaks to the resilience and adaptability of women peace builders. Every single time we face a pushback, there's always another way that we can rise above. And this is also sometimes limited by our own creativity in these spaces. And we've demonstrated, for example, this question of resentment or lack of understanding, which we observe in Nigeria and elsewhere, that, for example, these pictorial guides or handbooks or the adapting of explanations of women, peace, and security in different ways. Maybe it is through a board game. In other parts of the world, our partners, for example, in Uganda, have developed a comic book, which they call a popular version of the National Action Plan. It just demonstrates the diversity and the creativity of women peace builders. Wonderful. À vous, Justine, la question et par rapport aux difficultés que vous avez eues et comment vous avez résolu ou essayé de voir comment résoudre ces problèmes.
Merci Catherine. Ça n'a pas été facile pour nous de travailler, surtout que nous sommes en guerre. On dit souvent que la RDC, c'est un pays post-conflit, mais nous sommes en conflit. Et surtout la province du Nord Kivu, puisque la partie Grand Nord, et il y a des ADF, des groupes armés ougandais qui sont là et qui tuent, qui sèment la désolation. La partie sud, il y a le Rwanda. Donc, le M23 qui est soutenu par le Rwanda et qui tue jusqu'aujourd'hui. Donc, ça n'a pas été facile. Mais ce qui est vrai, je veux dire que lorsqu'on parle de la résilience, souvent moi je dis la résilience, c'est la femme congolaise. Puisqu'elle s'adapte à cette situation. Lorsqu'il y a des groupes armés qui imposent leurs lois, elles se disent pour survivre, je dois m'adapter. S'il faut qu'elle récolte et qu'elle donne la moitié de sa récolte pour sa survie, elle le fait pour qu'elle puisse survivre, elle et sa famille. Donc, ce n'est pas facile. Mais je dirais que avec cette expérience très difficile, quand même, on arrive, les femmes se sont dit, nous ne pouvons pas rester des victimes, mais nous devons être des actrices des changements et nous devons nous battre pour que nous puissions ramener la paix. Et c'est ainsi que les femmes et la communauté, bien sûr, puisque tu ne peux pas travailler avec les femmes sans pouvoir travailler avec toute la communauté. Donc, dans les comités locaux de développement, comme on identifie les problèmes et on cherche des solutions, on essaie un peu de trouver les solutions. On s'est dit, on peut faire ça. Lorsqu'il y a les affrontements sont vraiment terribles, on se déplace un peu, puis on revient. Et c'est une vie qui n'est pas facile, puisque facilement, tu trouves chez nous, en RDC, un jeune de 20 ans qui n'a jamais eu la chance de rester ou d'étudier, puisqu'il doit se déplacer continuellement. Donc, la situation n'est pas facile. Donc, pour les difficultés, nous voulons la paix. Il faut vraiment qu'on arrive à trouver la paix, puisque ça fait longtemps, plus de 20 ans. Là, vraiment, nous voulons la paix. Mais aussi, je vais dire comment on a contourné ces difficultés. Je dirais qu'il y a eu d'abord cette résilience et après, il y a la flexibilité des GNWP. Parce que je sais que dans la localisation, on devrait avoir un atelier de localisation dans un contrée jusqu'aujourd'hui qui est occupé par les M23. Mais heureusement qu'ils ont accepté qu'on puisse délocaliser notre localisation. Je m'excuse pour la répétition. Pour qu'on puisse délocaliser notre localisation et travailler dans un autre endroit. Et là, je dis merci, puisque ce que nous faisons, c'est de voir où on peut travailler. On ne peut pas rester les mains croisées, mais on voit comment nous pouvons adapter et travailler là où il y a le minimum de sécurité. Mais aussi l'autre défi est qu'aujourd'hui, il y a des pourparlers en RDC, comme vous les connaissez, mais les femmes sont exclues. À Nairobi, les femmes ne sont pas associées. À Luanda, les femmes ne sont pas associées. Dernièrement, nous avions fait une déclaration, peut-être là aussi je vais ajouter, avec notre expérience de travail, puisque nous sommes au Nord Kivu, et au Nord Kivu, nous travaillons toujours avec les pays voisins. On travaille maintenant avec l'Ouganda, le Rwanda et le Burundi. Donc, on est à 4 pays pour voir ce que les femmes peuvent faire dans la résolution Femmes, Paix et Sécurité. Et là, j'ai dit que nous avons fait une déclaration pour qu'on n'oublie pas les femmes lorsqu'il y a des pourparlers, puisque les femmes sont concernées. Nous attendons, nous avons fait une déclaration, nous croyons que notre voix sera attendue. Mais l'autre problème aussi, c'est au niveau de la décentralisation. Comme nous devons travailler dans les entités territoriales décentralisées, la décentralisation connaît beaucoup de problèmes en RDC et je crois qu'il faut qu'on arrive à une parfaite décentralisation des choses pour que la voix de la femme soit attendue.
Merci beaucoup, Justine. C'est vraiment important ce que vous soulevez. So Justine says that the difficulties experienced are, of course, because we talk about DRC being a post-conflict context, but there is overt war happening still in some areas of the country. There is the resilience of women, and I know Shirin is grinning because Shirin dislikes the word resilience because it should be beyond resilience. But in some contexts, like in Eastern DRC, resilience is a first step. That Congolese women, according to Justine, are themselves the essence of resilience is that they will do what they need to do to survive and eventually thrive, but that they also are not complacent. They're not willing to be victims. They are not willing to stay in their victimhood, which is one of the opportunities that has demonstrated the power of women peace builders, and that women can mobilize communities to be able to respond to the crisis and the needs. And Justine highlights, of course, the need for peace in DRC, peace being peace from war, but peace beyond only the absence of violence. She thanks the GNWP, and of course, in turn, I'd like to extend that thanks to our government colleagues from PSOP in the Global Affairs Canada for the flexibility to be able to adapt as much as we can and be flexible to and respond to the crisis that is happening in some of these countries. And this is part of being a feminist funder, a feminist donor, and a feminist organization in ourselves to be able to work with local partners to adapt to the needs and the necessary responses to the local difficulties. And of course, the exclusion of women in the negotiation process is happening in the region and Eastern DRC and at the regional level have been difficult and pose another difficulty and pushback. But the regional collaboration highlighted by Justine with colleagues and other women peace builders, other GNWP partners even in Rwanda and Uganda, in addition to DRC, has been one of these opportunities that have been seized by women peace builders. And then lastly, of course, the difficulty with decentralization, a country where decentralization is challenging and has not been fully implemented, makes it slightly more difficult for women peace builders to do this work in a sustainable and long-standing way. I have one last question before we also start answering questions from our public, which I know we have a few. Maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, Patience and Justine, if you could share with us an unexpected impact that you have observed on the localization strategy and the implementation. Donc, Justine, I will go with you first. Donc, peut-être si vous pouvez nous partager un impact, un résultat non attendu que vous avez observé.
Oui,
En une ou deux phrases.
les résultats non attendus, vraiment, on ne croyait pas que avec les autorités locales, ils peuvent donc adopter la stratégie des femmes, paix et sécurité et nous soutenir. Mais là, vraiment, des entités territoriales décentralisées, les autorités locales nous ont soutenus.
Wonderful. So local authorities being one of their biggest allies in the decentralization and in the implementation of localization of women, peace, and security is one of the unexpected results and findings of this process. Wonderful. Merci beaucoup, Justine. And Patience, over to you, 1 or 2 sentences on an unexpected impact that you've observed. No? I think the internet may have frozen and, oh, Patience, are you back? No. Patience, have you returned?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, over to you, 1 or 2 sentences of an
Yeah.
unexpected impact.
Okay, for us in WANEP, implementing this project, an unexpected impact of localization strategy has been a linkage of the women, peace and security agenda to the need for women's economic empowerment. Because notably, during the localization rights workshop, it came to the fore that due to the dwindling economic resources and increase of level of poverty amongst community women, that there was a need to include economic empowerment of women as a strategy in development of local action plans. So presently in Balanga local government area, where the localization steering committee is most active, the women have been able to come together to have what we call a cooperative society, where they're able to get seed grants to carry out small scale businesses. So I believe that going forward, there's a need for that integration to ensure that women are able to have a source of livelihood. That way they can be able to pull together funds and carry out local peace initiatives, thus implementing the local action plan with the budgets available to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patience, and merci beaucoup, Patience and Justine, for this second talk show. We're very glad to have been able to hear some of these experiences that you have learned and gained over the decade of implementing women, peace, and security at the local level in both DRC and Nigeria. Now, I'd like to turn over to my colleague, Sophia Farion, Senior Program Officer at GNWP, to share with us 1 or 2 questions from the Q&A discussion that we've been having online. And each of our panelists will have 1 or 2 sentences, so apologies, to respond to these outstanding questions before we close off with closing remarks by our wonderful senator colleague.
Sure. Thanks so much, Katrina. Okay, there are a number of questions, starting with this one. So this question is, how have your initiatives ensured the commitment of state actors to the implementation of the WPS agenda, specifically in relation to securing funding for implementation?
All right. The big question, la question qui tue, le financement. Who would like to tackle this question first? Perhaps Shirin, if you'd like to go first, and then Justine, Patience, and Sandra can close us off.
Yeah, that's a huge question. We were just talking about underfunding. So within the context of Lebanon, the collapse of the whole system, definitely this is something that we cannot promise. But what we can promise is that now Lebanon is between the 2 NAPs. And hopefully what we're trying to do within the localization is to push forward into how to have the upcoming NAP include the localization priorities and needs that we will be having. This is one. Second, as also the esteemed representative of Canada was saying about underfunding, the role of civil society and how we're able to have, through such meetings, amplify our voices and talk about the necessity to have funding to local peace builders. I think this is the way to go from a bottom-up approach.
Thank you. Shukran, Shirin. Justine, à vous. La question sur le financement. Qu'est-ce qui est nécessaire pour le financement, pour un financement efficace?
Je crois que ce qui est nécessaire, comme on vient de le dire, il faut toujours partir de la base. Comme pour les plans locaux de développement que nous avons, c'est toute la communauté qui est impliquée dans l'élaboration du plan. Ils identifient les besoins, ils voient nous avons besoin de ça et ça, ils priorisent les besoins et ils cherchent les moyens. Et je crois que une fois qu'ils connaissent la réalité, ce dont ils ont besoin, et lorsqu'on demande le financement, ils vont tous s'impliquer pour la mise en œuvre. Et là, ça sera une réussite. Donc, il faut toujours commencer du bas vers le haut.
Merci beaucoup, Justine. Patience, over to you. You're muted.
Can I have a question again? I think I didn't get it at first.
Yes, in a short form, what kind of financing or what do we need to make sure that financing is as efficient for local women peace builders as possible?
I think there's a need for a pool of funds to be available, particularly if we are as civil society organizations, international NGOs and regional organizations can have a pool of funds available, that we can be able to have local women apply for this pool of funds and implement local initiatives that they need to ensure peaceful coexistence at the community level. This would be great. Because at present, aside sourcing for funds internationally, within the country, there's no pool of funds to ensure that local women are able to key in and acquire the needed resources to carry out interventions at the local level. So I think there's need for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Patience.
Sandra, so financing is a huge issue, but I consider that sustainable location of this agenda requires, as I mentioned before, technical, human, and financial resources by local authority. That's we need it, and the participation of women. If we are talking about finance a strong civil society on the appropriation of this agenda at the local level.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias, Sandra. And before we close out today, I'd like to pass the floor back to our Chief Executive Officer, Maria Victoria Mavic Cabrera Baeza. Over to you.
Maria Victoria is correct.
Technically.
Yeah, just a very quick additional response to your question, Katrina, on unintended impact. You see, localization brings together a broad range of actors. It's actually the microcosm of society, as I enumerated earlier who those are. And so all of them have different concerns and have something to contribute to the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. So one unexpected result was in Lebanon, actually, Shireen. If you recall, one of the active participants were representatives from the Internal Security Force, which is the police force, right, in Lebanon. And realizing the focus on gender framework, on gender responsive planning and gender responsive policies, they came to us, to Shireen and us, saying, we've been thinking about integrating gender in the work of the police in Lebanon. And they said, we want to begin by monitoring our operational plans with that perspective. That to me was very, very important. And I've coordinated with UN Women office in Lebanon so we can do this together, and which, you know, now this serves as a reminder to myself and to you, Katrina, and Alona and Shireen to follow up on that and make sure it happened, because it's their initiative that we should be supporting. Another unintended impact, not from our perspective, but from the perspective of others who are, you know, following the Women, Peace, and Security resolution, is how the localization steering committees automatically transformed into first responders working with frontliners. They were amazed, they were surprised that immediately Yeah, so COVID was declared a global pandemic on March 11. Beginning of April, our localization steering committees were already responding, including in Ukraine, which was fascinating. They organized psychosocial counseling for victims or potential victims of domestic violence. As we know, it has an exponential increase during the COVID, at the height of COVID. But so they were surprised. This is really, it's impressive, it's surprising. But to us, it's not a surprise. We tell them it's not a surprise because it is in the DNA of local women peace builders and our male supporters to respond to any conflict and crisis. And then finally, it's an appeal to the government of Colombia, which I will request to Natalia to convey. You see, we've been, as Sandra has emphasized, we've been implementing localization in Colombia for over a decade now. And frankly, when we always coordinate with the national government. At that time, the Santos government was new. And they told us, and they were already starting to facilitate or thinking of facilitating the peace negotiation with the FARC. They said, we have a lot on our plate. We realize the importance of National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. But at this point, please understand, we cannot prioritize it. To cut the story short, it's happening now, right? And so when we learned that it's not possible to develop a National Action Plan, this was 2011 to 2012, we approached the governors, the mayors in Cauca, Valle de Cauca, in other departments, and they said, we're not waiting for the national government. We need this. We have, our constituencies are direct victims and survivors of conflict. We need this resolution. We will localize it. So they develop local action plans and other mechanisms to implement it. So the point that I'm making, Natalia, is that there's a wealth of experience, there's vast knowledge, there's strong commitment on implementing the Women, Peace, and Security agenda in these departments and local communities. So we're also in Tolima. We've localized we've started localizing in Choco, in Arauca. So I really hope the national government recognize that experience, that commitment, that knowledge, and bring them to the process of national action planning. It is in the best interest of everyone to bring all of this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mavic. And thank you to everyone. I'd now like to pass the floor to Senator Mary Lou McPhedran, Independent Senator from Manitoba, Canada, to close us off for today's session.
Thank you, Katrina and Mavic and everyone who has participated today in such an inspiring event. As Katrina has said, I'm Senator Mary Lou McPhedran, a founding member of the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders Board, and now an independent in the Senate of Canada, representing Manitoba, which is situated on Treaty 1 territory of the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene First Nations, and is the homeland of the Métis Nation. A special thank you to Sandra from Colombia, Shireen from Lebanon, Justine from the DRC, and Patience from Nigeria for your courageous local leadership and for sharing your experiences with us here today. Merci également à nos collègues des délégations canadiennes et colombiennes à l'ONU et ONU Femmes d'avoir coparrainé cet événement avec le Global Network of Women Peacebuilders. La localisation des priorités des femmes, la paix et la sécurité n'a jamais été aussi critique. Alors que les conflits évoluent et deviennent plus complexes à l'échelle mondiale, nous voyons les besoins croissants de notre compréhension et de nos méthodes pour prévenir et répondre aux conflits et promouvoir la paix et la sécurité doivent enraciner dans les connaissances et les besoins locaux. Cette stratégie de localisation a été reconnue par le secrétaire général des Nations Unies comme une meilleure pratique. Ceci assure la mise en œuvre complète des priorités des femmes, la paix et la sécurité par l'analyse des besoins spécifiques au contexte de réalité vivée des femmes sur le terrain, en réunissant des acteurs diversifiés et en collaborant directement et significativement à la construction de la paix locale. Nous savons que la localisation fournit des opportunités aux femmes locales et aux autres groupes marginalisés de contribuer aux politiques qui ont un impact sur leur vie. Traduit les engagements mondiaux en loi nationale, soutient une gouvernance locale sensible aux gens et aux conflits et favorise la collaboration et la coordination entre les acteurs locaux afin d'adapter la mise en œuvre de l'agenda WPS à leur contexte unique et à leurs besoins de sécurité. Localization ensures leadership, ownership, and participation of local communities. It facilitates the alignment of regional and national policies with implementation on the ground and promotes women and local peace builders' meaningful participation in decision-making on the policies and practices that impact them. Since its inception, GNWP's localization strategy has been implemented in 18 countries and continues to expand, making great strides in achieving implementation of women, peace, and security, often in the face of resistance and very limited resources. Today, we heard specific examples from the grassroots on how localization also translates into more inclusive and resilient communities. And here are two more countries with examples where they are not here today, but in Northern Philippines, after the localization workshops, 5 women were appointed to the Bodong Council, a traditional institution in charge of handling domestic disputes and other issues. Women's inclusion has broadened the council's reach to activities of trauma healing and reconciliation, spreading messages of peace and condemning violence against women. In Uganda, localization has helped heal relationships between police officers and the community and increase trust in society and local institutions. As a result, reported crimes have more than doubled as women feel more comfortable coming forward with their experiences of sexualized and gender-based violence. The evidence is clear. Localization increases participation of women in decision-making and peace processes. Localization improves prevention of and response to sexualized and gender-based violence, and localization contributes to stronger, better implemented national and local action plans. As we also heard today, barriers are big, and we have to be honest about the setbacks exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. Implementing gender-based analysis plus in local communities can infuse institutional capacity to create initiatives and programs that take women's and gender diverse people's experiences into account. The ability to better understand the diversity of people's lived experiences with gender and the complex needs that derive from those experiences allows for a more comprehensive approach to promoting women's participation and inclusion. Gender-based analysis plus is a powerful tool that can be used to build programs, initiatives, and policies based on an analysis that, in the long run, will translate into stronger democratic societies based on gender equality interlocked with climate justice. Localization aims for sustainability, and Gender-Based Analysis Plus is a key instrument in achieving this. Only by listening and understanding local peace builders' experiences will we be able to achieve inclusive and sustainable peace for all through healthier democracies. Let's be clear, ensuring the full implementation of the WPS agenda is hard and challenging work, but it's a shared responsibility because localization is the missing link that unites us as diverse advocates in governments and civil society, working to amplify the voices of women and girls to realize equality, climate justice, and peace for all. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Sénatrice. Thank you so much to all of you who have joined us for this hour-and-a-half session. As we know, there is a lot to cover in so little time. We encourage you to continue this conversation online using the hashtag Localizing 1325. You'll also see in that hashtag a lot more evidence of the work that women and young women peace builders are doing at the ground and at the local level. Thank you so much to our co-host, the Government of Canada, the Permanent Mission of Canada to the United Nations, Lynn, for all of your help, the Permanent Mission of Colombia to the UN for joining us as well. Thank you, Natalia. Of course, to our colleagues from UN Women for joining us, Sarah, for your remarks, and all of you on behalf of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, our local partners, thank you for joining us online. Thank you, merci. In Canada, we also say miigwech and shukran, gracias. Have a good rest of your day and evening. We'll tune back in other conversations online. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shukran. Shukran.